This is the Landlording for Life podcast, where landlords explore their success and stories of failure while building a foundation to improve upon. Here's your host, Sean Morrissey.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Landlording for Life podcast for this week. This is your host, Sean Morrissey, and as always, thanks so much for tuning in. So today, we've got on the line with us a gentleman by the name of Dave Foster. Now, Dave is with the Exchange Resource Group, and they just launched a website called the 1031 Investor. And he's not only a qualified intermediary for 1031 exchanges, but he is an investor himself and just an all-around real estate junkie. So, Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Sean, it's great to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you betcha. Thanks for being on. So, Dave, let's dive right into it. Now, today we're going to talk about 1031 exchanges a little bit, and I was hoping you can give us a little bit about your background, how you got involved in real estate and ended up being a qualified intermediary.
Hey, you bet. It's interesting that you use the term dive in because the 1031 exchange is one of those components where people talk about, being a river being a mile wide and 6 inches deep. We're in an area of tax code that's about 12 miles deep and maybe 2 inches wide. And you've got to be a nerd to go into it. And
yeah, absolutely.
That's where I live. So that's me. But 1031 exchanges, I'll give you just the 5-second view on what they are and then tell you how in the world I managed to get into them. The 1031 exchange allows investors to sell investment real estate and then use a process and buy new investment real estate without having to pay tax on the profit that they normally would have.
Got it.
And instead, they get to use that profit to buy more real estate. So, that by itself is kind of attractive. It's like a free gift from the government. Here, take this money, and instead of giving it to me, go and buy more real estate, which is kind of awesome. Now, it's been a part of the tax code since 1920. But for decades and decades, it was really meant as for large agricultural farmers that didn't have any cash, so they couldn't pay tax, but needed to move their farms and plots of land around. So it allowed them to swap properties, basically.
Okay.
Now, that still wasn't too user-friendly. But around about 1990-ish, a major U.S. Supreme Court case was finally resolved that allowed investors to start to sell property and then using the process by leaving their funds with an intermediary, they could go and buy new real estate and defer the tax that way. So there was no more having to swap. It was all user-friendly all of a sudden. And I happened to be doing my first flip right at that time. It was a crazy little duplex in Sloan's Lake area of Denver, if there's any Denver folks out there listening today. And it didn't take a lot of work. It was mostly cosmetics and that kind of thing. So it didn't take us an awful lot of work. And I turned it over for a nice profit. The problem was a couple months later when I was talking to my accountant about the dreaded T word, and last year he said, "Man, you really didn't make anything on this." I said, "What are you talking about? I made a lot of money. It was awesome." He goes, "Nope, you got this tax, this tax, this tax." And all of a sudden there went my profit, and I was stuck with enough, for a movie and a bowl and a bag of popcorn. And that was very, very frustrating. And I'm sure, Sean, that, you and a lot of your listeners have kind of experienced that same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a hollow victory, right?
Yeah.
You made a beautiful product and didn't make anything off of it.
Yep.
Yeah. So right at that time, I had some friends who said, "Dave, you need to think about doing a 1031 exchange when you do that in the future." And my first response was, "Well, what's that?" And of course they said, "Well, if we tell you, we'll have to kill you, but come on over for some coffee." And when I found that I could have turned that property into a rental for a while and then sold it and not only gotten the income from the rental, but then also turned around and sold it and deferred all the tax and used that to buy more property, I said, this is the answer that I've been looking for. This is what's going to allow me the freedom to be able to pursue my dream by truly maximizing the amount of profit that I'm making on every deal. And so, that was 25 years ago. And here we are today now doing it for investors all over the country. and I do it for myself. And it's such a powerful tool.
No, absolutely. And it's one of those things where, especially with this podcast, it's, there's folks that know what a 1031 exchange is, but I wanted to get down to the bones, and I appreciate you going through some of the history there as to how it evolved. But let's dig in a little more detail in regards to what a 1031 exchange actually is and kind of the benefits as a landlord or real estate investor. What in essence is a 1031 exchange doing?
Yeah, well, for your folks especially, landlording for life, that's exactly where 1031 sweet spot is. Because you can't use 1031 exchanges on fix and flips. So you have to be willing to adjust your model a little bit to think a little more buy and hold. So 1031 exchanges are for property that you buy with the intent to hold for productive use. So you buy a property, fix it up, put a renter in it to enjoy, and then at a later date, and most people would say that a year is a good time, you evaluate that property and say, does this still fit in my portfolio? Am I generating the rent on equity that I would like to make? How's my net operating income looking like? What's my ROI? All those kinds of calculations that tell you this property still belongs in my portfolio, or it's time to sell. And if it's time to sell, then that's when you use the 1031 exchange. And the 1031 exchange, for most investors, you don't even know that it's there, really, because you follow the exact same process and you use the exact same professionals. So you hire a realtor if you want to list your property. That realtor helps you find a buyer, put it under contract. It goes to a title company. Escrow happens, and your property you're started a 1031 exchange. Then you do the exact same side on the reverse. The 1031 exchange lies in the documentation that's present in both closings and in the funds, making sure that you have a separate segregated exchange account that you don't touch.
Okay. And
the money goes directly from there then to your purchase. And voila, at the end of the year, your attorney fills out one form. It's the 8824 for all the tax geeks out there, and you completed a tax-deferred exchange. Congratulations.
Okay, very good. So in essence, what we're doing then is we're deferring our capital gains until the point in which we go to sell.
That's correct. Now, and that's where it gets really fun if you've got a long time horizon. Because anytime you do another 1031 exchange on that piece of property, you will again defer all the tax. And you can keep pushing that forward as long as you want until you die.
Beautiful. Okay, and that's a great segue to our next question, which is basically what would be considered, in your opinion, the pros of a 1031 exchange, and what might be, some of the cons that might be behind it, if any?
Well, the 1031 exchange, like I mentioned, is for people with more of a buy and hold mentality. And I've got to admit, I'm somewhat of an adrenaline junkie, and I do get very bored sometimes. It's kind of fun to fix and flip something, right?
Right.
You want that energy, you want to do it, curse the torpedoes full speed ahead. So if you really like the adrenaline or the fix and flip, then the 1031 is not going to work into your model.
Makes sense.
But then by the same token, once you've done one or two fix and flips and you pay that huge tax bill, then you kind of go, wait a minute, maybe there's a better way. So the 1031 exchange pros definitely are that it allows you to maximize your tax benefit. It also maximizes the opportunity for you to leverage your portfolio moving forward. So it's not just a question of leverage in terms of loans, but you want to think of that tax as basically an interest-free loan to the government.
From
the government, I'm sorry.
That's a great point. I've never thought of it like that. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I was just with a client today, and we were talking about a $200,000 gain. Gosh, I just paid the tax. Well, if you had $50,000, which in her state, that's going to be about her tax rate. If you had $50,000 to invest, what could you invest in it and make? Well, I could buy another rental property and make 10% on it. Great. So at the end of the year, how much would you have made on that? $5,000, right?
Yeah.
I said, well, if you do the 1031 exchange, that's exactly the opportunity you've got. If you don't, write that check for $50,000 to the government and call it a day.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take adding too many of those together before all of a sudden you're talking real money, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and again, it's one of those where I couldn't think of any cons per se. But yeah, if you, I guess if you're a fix and flipper and you like the fast pace and you want to make money tomorrow, this may not be for you. But the long-term wealth builders, absolutely, it's.
Yeah.
And I'm going to start looking at it as an interest-free loan from the government. I suppose that's good stuff.
That's exactly right. A couple other cons. The things that I hear from people the most are, number one, sometimes in a seller's market, it's tough to find good replacement properties because the 1031 has some pretty tight timelines. From the day you close your sale, you only have 45 days to identify your potential replacements.
Got it.
So that's a constrained time frame that can work against you in a seller's market. So you do have to be aware of that. So, of course, finding the good properties. Sometimes people will say, if they know I'm a 1031 investor, I'm not going to get as good a deal. I'm tempted to take worse deals simply to defer the tax. And I would say those are all valid criticisms, but they're also easily solved by being your own investor and making your own decisions. And if the deal isn't right, you don't take it. And if someone's negotiating hard with you, walk away, but do it when you've still got enough time.
Okay, very good. So let me give you this example. Something I saw an investor do recently with the 1031 exchange is they identified the property first, got it under contract, and then put their building up for sale, knowing that it would go under contract fairly quickly because it is a seller's market. Do you see that fairly often where you identify the property first?
Absolutely. Yeah, okay. That's a beautiful strategy to use because from a statutory framework, all that has to happen is the closing of the sale has to happen before the closing of the purchase. So to go into contract ahead of time, absolutely. Now, the thing that's kind of tough sometimes is to get that kind of contingency when you're trying to purchase from a seller when it's a seller's market. And in that instance, what I tell investors is that, well, don't forget, in a 1031 exchange, you're also a seller. So what if you sold your property and required a contingency in that allowed you to go find your new property before you closed the sale?
Well, that's an interesting point. I know, like with our local realtor board and their commercial contract, I don't know if they actually have a paragraph that has like a seller finds a new building contingency within it. But I suppose over attorney review, that could easily be modified.
Yeah, it's very, very easy to write in. The thing that does is that lets you use the power of this being a seller's market.
Yeah.
To say, I'm the seller, here's what I'm going to demand. And buyers, when you look at it from the buyer's perspective, they're going to love it because it lets them contract the property. And if you take an extended period of time to close on it, who gets all the appreciation during that period of time?
Yeah.
Well, they are. Right?
Yep.
So they like it. It gives them time to line up financing. It's kind of a win-win for everybody.
Okay, no, that's a great strategy. So back to the time frames. Now, you had mentioned 45 days to basically identify a property after that initial property closes. What other time frames are involved there? Because I know there's a few others.
Right. Well, again, running concurrently. So day one starts with the day of the sale. You have 180 days to complete the entire process.
Okay. So 6 months.
So that's not so bad unless you've got something where there's a lot of mitigation or problem financing or something like that. It's really the 45 days that typically gets people.
Yep, that makes sense. I mean, that's tight. So 180 days to complete the whole process, 45 days to identify a property. And then was there a third timeline, like you need to close on that identified property within a certain time frame, or am I off there?
Well, that's 180 days.
Oh, got it.
180 days to complete it all.
Okay.
And close, yeah.
Okay, very good. So 45 days and then 180 days, and that's probably the biggest point of value to folks listening to this podcast today is if you can keep those numbers in your mind, I think you can kind of wrap your head around everything else. So if you're a landlord that's interested in performing a 1031 exchange, you've got some capital gain there, you're ready to scale up. Where do they begin? What's typically the point of contact in order to get the process going?
Well, your intermediary is going to want to be, from a structural point of view, the intermediary is going to want to be involved when you get a contract for the sale, because all of the documents and everything come from the interface between your QI and the escrow officers.
Okay.
So just structurally, that's where that is. Now, of course, the true power of the 1031 comes from the different ways in which you apply it. So I would say landlords are going to be, we should always be in a mode of planning, right?
Right.
And I would say, as you're looking at your long-term strategies, you want to be involving your QI to say, how can I make this work? Because the applications of 1031 are so many. You could take one property and you could use those proceeds to go buy several properties. That's called a diversification exchange.
Okay.
You could go the other direction. If you begin, I usually joke, I say so many of our people started out as what we would call accidental landlords.
Yep.
He's got a property, she's got a property, and they get married. They just became landlords for a new property. And so, man, that's kind of fun, and it's exciting, and they start buying more and more and more and more. And then all of a sudden, one day they wake up and they're tired. And they wonder why. Well, it's because they've got 20 or 30 or 40 properties that they're trying to manage. So at that point in time, you can use the 1031 exchange to start selling properties, several properties, and buying fewer, bigger properties. And that's what we would call a consolidation exchange. Because 1031 is nationwide, you can use 1031s to move your property across geographies. Like I was telling you, I've moved my portfolio from Colorado to Connecticut to Florida to Kansas and now back to Colorado, all using the 1031 exchange and not paying tax. You could also use the 1031 exchange to change sectors or types of real estate. So again, as you're looking at your long-term strategy, you may be in single-family rentals right now. You might think, gosh, multifamily is kind of the place I want to go. How can I get there? Or commercial or industrial, agricultural. That's the beautiful thing about how flexible the 1031 exchange can be. But it's all about sitting down and doing the planning.
No, it makes good sense. And going back to the term qualified intermediary, for those listeners that might not be familiar, how would you define a qualified intermediary?
That's actually a specific industry term, and you could just use any kind of search engine, search qualified intermediary. Those are the people whose sole and only function with you can be the documentation and the performance of the 1031 exchange. They can't have any other relationship with you other than that. So it's become a specific industry, and most of the good QIs you'll find are nationwide, so they can handle exchanges in all states. There's no specific credentialing, but as you can tell from where that thing sits in the tax code and how deep and nuanced it is, the best QIs out there are going to be attorneys and accountants.
Okay.
So those are the folks that are typically managing this process.
Okay, very good. So when it comes to like what companies, you might recommend as a qualified intermediary, I guess where do folks start? Do they simply Google qualified intermediary for their zip code, or should they perform more of a nationwide search?
Yeah, I would look at a nationwide search. The first thing I'd do is call Dave Foster. Of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course. There are several nationwide firms that are out there like ours. Your title company that you work with, all title companies almost, will have what is called a captive QI firm.
Okay.
Which means they will typically have their insurance underwriter as a qualified intermediary firm that's a branch of their business. And in that instance, you can go through that as well. Again, typically, the best experience you're going to have is not going to come from the biggest company, the smallest company, the cheapest company. It's going to come from the representative that you are assigned to and the service that they provide. You could be with the biggest company in the world, but you're going to have a sales or marketing rep assigned to you. And that consultant is going to determine your experience. So I would look for the person or the firm that you gel with the best.
Okay.
And whether or not they're big or not is going to be kind of irrelevant.
Okay. No, those are good pro tips there. Anything else you wanted to add? Sorry, I kind of interrupted there.
No, that was kind of where I was going with it.
Okay, perfect. So next question here. And this, I guess this falls back in the name of the podcast, Landlording for Life in the most literal sense. But can you explain what happens if a landlord, let's say, performs a series of 1031 exchanges, defers all those capital gain taxes for years and years, and then up and dies? What happens to the folks that will inherit those properties, and what happens to that then capital gains tax in a general sense?
Yeah, well, I call this the second best way to deal with all that wealth. So when you die owning real estate, that real estate is revalued as of the day you pass away. And your heirs get it at what is called the stepped up basis.
Got it.
So if you had a property that had $1 million in gain on it, that gain basically is wiped out for your heirs.
Oh, my goodness.
And they start over. And if they sold the property that next day, they would pay no tax.
Oh, man.
It's crazy. And then I literally have clients who are now on their third generation of passing on wealth this way. And every time that clock resets, and of course, you can imagine in the third generation, we're not talking millions upon billions of dollars.
Absolutely.
Of not just real estate, but deferred tax.
Well, and to make it three generations, I mean, that takes a lot of responsibility of that next generation. So that's a beautiful thing.
Right. They carry it on to the family name, and because they see what it did for dad and what it did for granddad.
Yeah.
And so they care for it. Now, of course, Sean, remember I said it's the second best way.
Yeah.
Because you got to die. So, but still, we all have to die sometimes. So I suppose that's okay for them.
Yeah,
but
leave a legacy.
What we will typically see investors do is, as landlords, they will start to transition as they move closer and closer to their retirement time. And I actually coined a phrase, and maybe someone else has said it before, but I coined this phrase a week ago, and I give you permission to use it. Everybody who is a landlord should be looking at becoming someday a lazy boy landlord.
Okay.
And by that, I mean, of course, right now you are answering tenant calls and fixing broken toilets and managing applications, and it's work. Being a landlord is not an easy process. And even if you're using good property managers, it's still quite a bit of involvement. But using the 1031 exchange over the course of years and decades, you can shape that portfolio until you are finally investing in truly passive real estate investments. Now, that might be rental real estate that you have great managers for and you don't have to do anything with. Or it could be a type of real estate product that we are seeing out there now, that like a tenants in common, which is a product that deals with corporate leases from national credit tenants on the commercial side. It's totally passive, but it qualifies for 1031 treatments.
Okay.
Delaware statutory trust, same kinds of thing. The principle, though, in all of these is that, or one other sector, are triple net corporate leases. The thing that these all have in common is they all qualify for 1031 treatment, and they are all absolutely passing on your part. So basically, you become a landlord who sits in your lazy boy and walks to the mailbox to pick up your check.
Yeah.
You're a lazy boy landlord.
I love it. You learned it here first, folks. Lazy boy landlord. That's what we're all aspiring to, right? Those listen to the podcast
Exactly.
anyways. Very good. So, those of us that have been involved with our local, RIA clubs or apartment associations, over the last year or two have probably heard that, 1031s in general have been under attack to some degree from legislators in Washington, and and I'm sure it all stems down to the fact that it's taxable capital gains that Washington would love to get their hands on. But I was hoping you can go into a little detail in regards to kind of what you've seen, what you know, and hopefully where you think this might be going when it comes to legislation being debated.
Sure. Yeah. It was the topic of all for the last year because nobody really knew what was going to go on. But I got to tell you that from my experience of 18 years of this, I've seen it almost every 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
There's always that debate because you're right. It's a huge chunk of tax dollars that the government would love to get their hands on. Of course, the downside to that the National Association of Realtors and concerned landlords and the Federation of Exchange Accommodators all managed to point out was if you take this away, you will dramatically decrease the volatility in sales and resales of real estate. And when you start affecting that, you start affecting tax dollars coming in from realtors, property managers, service providers, documentary stamps for different states. So when they sorted all that out, they're able to make a pretty compelling case that letting capital gains tax stay deferred still generates far more revenue that goes into the government coffers. So that's why ultimately, once again this year, real estate is safe from 1031. But there was an interesting shift in the new tax policy. Up until this year, 2018, 1031 exchanges could be done on real estate. They could also be done on personal property, like business equipment. Okay. Heavy bulldozers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Beginning now in 2018, it is now only a process for real estate itself.
Got it. So only for real estate.
They did eliminate that.
Okay. So only for real estate effective this year. You can't do 1031 exchanges with business sales or other types of assets.
Right. But of course, if you're selling, say, a restaurant where you own the building and the land and the equipment, you can still sell that and do an exchange on the land and real estate portion.
Very good. Okay. So it can be excluded from the overall sale. Okay, that I was unaware of. Okay, very good. Great explanation there to justify why the 1031 exchange still exists. Good stuff. So Dave, three of the questions we ask every of our interviewees is as follows, and I was hoping you could give us your thoughts. But for those aspiring landlords out there, what might be one book you'd recommend that they read in 2018 to assist them in their growth?
You're really going to limit me to one book at this point in time?
Okay.
My goodness, I loved that question, by the way. I had to sit down and I had to process that because I do read a lot. Of course, as an investor, I'm always trying to improve myself as an investor. So this was a great challenge for me to come up with one, and I couldn't. So you're going to be stuck with a list. I think that the first book I read that was really seminal in getting me thinking with the mindset of an investor, and an investor that can have a reality in his focus instead of a dream that might not be reality, is The Millionaire Next Door.
Okay.
And that's been out for a bunch of years, but it really defines for you the true identity of what you want, of aspects you want to look for if and when you're going to make it, what the reality is versus the McLaren jet plane, St. Lucia dream that's not reality. So what do you really do? So Millionaire Next Door, there's two incredible works that nobody's heard of by a gentleman named Richard Marbury. And they're macro works, not necessarily about real estate, but monetary policy and business creation policy. And they're called, strangely enough, Whatever Happened to Penny Candy and the Clipper Ship Strategy. And when you read those, you'll learn how money affects your life and how you can use government monetary policy and inflation to your benefit.
Awesome. Yeah, I've not heard of either of those books. I'm going to check them out today.
Quirky little reads. And I got to tell you, I always leave everybody with this one. That is that the absolute two best books for learning how to negotiate real estate and how to enter into relationships and contractual relationships from a construct and a collaborative point of view, the book of Proverbs and the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible.
Ha, very good. Any others you wanted to recommend?
I got to tell you, I'm a big fan in watching our nation's debt and personal debt are going.
Okay.
I'm kind of a big fan of Dave Ramsey at this point and his Total Money Makeover as well.
Okay. Very good. All right.
I think the true power for an investor comes from freedom. And freedom comes from being able to make the moves you want to. And personal debt, student loan debt, those kind of things can easily become hindrances to our investing rather than helping us to our investing.
Okay. No, makes perfect sense. Well, yeah, you gave us a handful there to check out after the podcast here, so I appreciate that. Now, what would be...
Can I give you one more?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Let's go for it. Yet. It's called Exchange Up, and it's all about 1031 exchanges. It's by Dave Foster, and it's in final editing right now.
All right.
So look for it in the next month. It'll be up on Amazon, or you can find it through our website, the 1031investor.com.
Beautiful. I'm looking forward to reading it. So, Dave, what would be one piece of advice you'd leave with our aspiring landlords that are looking to grow? That's assisting you.
It's kind of dorky, but I would say keep learning because you're never going to know it all. People looked at Carlton Sheets in the 80s and said, this is the be-all, end-all. And people are still creating new ways to buy and sell real estate since Carlton did. So it's not what you don't know that's going to hurt you. It's what you think you know that you don't know.
Okay.
That's going to hurt you. So keep learning. And my corollary to that is that never worry. Don't let yourself worry about the deal that gets by you, because it's not the deal you lose that's going to kill you. It's the deal you get that you ultimately wish you didn't.
Yeah.
So patience and education, those are the keys to long-term investing.
Beautiful. Well said. Well, Dave, boy, this has been a podcast of great value. I think our listeners are going to be pretty excited once we wrap up here with everything they've learned. But for those out there that are ready to take that next step, what's the best way to contact you to either start a 1031 exchange or perhaps just learn some more information?
Absolutely. Our company's name is Exchange Resource Group. You can catch us at erg1031.com. My email address is simply dave@erg1031.com. And if you want to holler at me, my phone number is 305-407-0740. I love to interface with investors.
Awesome. And I should mention that, we basically met through Bigger Pockets. So you're a huge Bigger Pockets fan, is that right?
Oh, absolutely. My goodness, that is the quintessential watering hole for real estate investors.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm sure they could find you on there too. So Dave, thanks again, man. I really appreciate you being on the podcast and all the information you've shared.
Oh, this was awesome, Sean. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Hey, try to dig yourself out of winter up there.
Yeah. We're almost through it here up in the Chicagoland area. So anyways, all right. Well, that's going to conclude this week's podcast. I hope you found it as valuable as I did. Big thanks to Dave Foster. Check him out on the1031investor.com once again. And we'll see you guys next week with another episode. Until then, keep landlording and we will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode. If you like what you heard, leave us a 5-star review and join our Facebook group to share your deals and ideas by searching @Landlording for Life. See you next time.